They told you Sophia was just an ancient myth, a poetic symbol for wisdom, a forgotten goddess buried beneath ruined temples and dusty scrolls, a beautiful story with no place in the modern world. But what if she wasn't forgotten by time, but forgotten by design? What if the story was never meant to disappear, only to be hidden in plain sight? In the deeper currents of the hidden tradition, Sophia was never reduced to metaphor. She was described as a return event, not a prophecy locked in some distant future, but something unfolding now, in the exact era we're living through. The Gnostics didn't speak of her return as fireworks in the sky or a dramatic cosmic spectacle. They described something closer, quieter, more unsettling. They said it would begin inside human consciousness first, and if you're honest, you've probably felt the signs already. That strange pressure in the air, the sense that something is about to break open. The feeling that as the world grows louder, faster, and more chaotic, something old is shedding, as if reality itself is preparing for an unveiling. And here's where it deepens. There were teachings connected to Jesus that never made it into the official story, teachings preserved outside the boundaries of institutional control, suggesting that before Sophia returns, a profound shift takes place, not just in governments or systems, not just in the outer world, but in the inner world of humanity. There are moments in history when something invisible begins to move beneath the surface of the world, and only those who feel it inside themselves can recognize it. This is not about predicting dates or announcing a new prophecy. It is about signs, subtle shifts, ancient patterns described in symbolic language long before our time, yet somehow echoing this exact moment. And once your eyes adjust to that possibility, you begin to notice something unsettling. The signs are not loud. They do not arrive with thunder. They appear quietly, in the way your soul has been pulling you towards something deeper, without giving you a clear reason why. A restlessness you cannot name, a hunger that ordinary success does not satisfy, a sense that something essential has been missing. This is not simply a story about Sophia. It is about a condition of consciousness that was whispered about in hidden teachings connected to Jesus, teachings that did not survive inside official structures. According to the Gnostic tradition, before Sophia returns, something shifts, not just in institutions, not just in society, but in the inner world of humanity. A preparation, a threshold. What they called Christ consciousness was not a title reserved for one figure in history, but a state of awakened perception that had to arise before wisdom could fully emerge again. Sophia was never merely an event. She symbolized the restoration of the divine feminine current of intelligence, the aspect of knowing that does not calculate but recognizes. In Gnostic cosmology, the world we experience was shaped under the influence of lower forces called archons, patterns of distortion born from ignorance and separation. The return of Sophia signals a movement beyond their reach, not through war, not through revolution, through awakening. If the Gnostics were right, Sophia does not return gently. She returns like light, entering a room that was deliberately constructed to keep you asleep. When that light appears, it does not argue with the darkness. It exposes it. Everything built on illusion begins to tremble. And to understand what that means, we have to look at something that many people sense but rarely articulate. Christianity did not only sideline Sophia, it also reshaped the image of Jesus, presenting him in a way that was easier to institutionalize. In the earliest Gnostic teachings, Jesus was not establishing a religion. He was revealing a map of liberation for those who were ready to remember who they already were. The Gnostics themselves were not forming a competing system. They were preserving a current of insight that could not be fully controlled. They spoke of the kingdom not as a future reward, but as a present reality discovered through gnosis, direct inner knowing. Within these teachings, Sophia appears again and again, not as a background figure, but as a cosmic intelligence woven into the very process of awakening. She represents wisdom in its feminine aspect, not sentimental softness, but penetrating clarity. Her story begins with descent, a reaching beyond the harmonious fullness of the pleroma that led to fragmentation and the birth of a flawed world under the demiurge. Yet the Gnostics did not frame this as tragedy alone. They saw in it a rhythm, a cycle, fall, forgetting, fragmentation, and then return. In texts such as the Apocryphon of John, Sophia is not only the one who descends, she is also the one who initiates restoration, breathing remembrance back into humanity. And this is where her connection with Christ becomes impossible to ignore. In Gnostic cosmology, Christ and Sophia are counterparts, two currents of the same restoration. Christ as divine light, Sophia as divine wisdom. One awakens vision, the other awakens understanding. One reveals the prison, the other reveals the door. If this perspective feels unfamiliar, it may be because history narrowed what was once expansive. After the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in the 20th century, buried Gnostic texts revealed how diverse early Christianity truly was. There was not one story, there were many, and some were too liberating to remain visible. Because if people realized that awakening required no external permission and that the divine spark was already alive within them, systems rooted in fear would quietly lose their grip. So Sophia was pushed into shadow. The feminine current of divinity was reduced to suspicion, temptation, or silence. But she did not vanish. She moved into symbols, into myths, into the quiet pressure within your own life. And perhaps that pressure is simply the beginning of your noticing. And perhaps that quiet pressure is not random at all, but the first tremor of something ancient rising again. Across the modern world, beneath the noise of headlines and algorithms, something older than trend or ideology is resurfacing, not because of fashion, not because of a movement, but because cycles turn. And when a cycle turns, what was buried begins to breathe again. The question is no longer whether Sophia is real in a historical sense. The deeper question is this: if a current of wisdom, long suppressed, were to re-enter human consciousness, how would it feel from the inside? It would not look like a woman descending from the sky. It would not resemble a savior stepping onto a stage. The Gnostic vision never described her return in theatrical terms. It spoke instead of a shift in the structure of perception itself, a missing intelligence reawakening, and when that intelligence begins to stir, reality does not collapse overnight. It begins to behave differently. Time feels strange. The pace of the world accelerates, yet inside you something slows down. Patterns you once ignored become impossible to overlook. Conversations that once felt normal now feel empty. You begin noticing the gap between what is said and what is meant, not only in institutions, in people, in yourself. In the Gnostic understanding, Sophia is not simply wisdom as information. She is wisdom as living perception, an aeon, a faculty of seeing that cuts through distortion. That is why the signs of her return are not dramatic world events. They are changes in what you can tolerate. Subtle refusals forming inside you, a growing inability to pretend. The world can operate on deception for a long time, but when wisdom begins to awaken within individuals, lies start collapsing under their own weight, not because they are attacked, because they are no longer believed. The myth of Sophia matters for this reason, not as a historical account to defend or debate, but as a symbolic map of how awakening unfolds. The Gnostics encoded a pattern. Wisdom descends into matter, becomes fragmented, forgets itself, and then begins to remember, first within the human vessel, then through it. This is the profound implication. Sophia does not return to the world as an external force. She returns through you, through the spark within you that has survived confusion like an ember buried under ash. They called this epinoia, inner insight, the quiet knowing that sees through illusion without asking permission. So, when the hidden teachings associated with Jesus spoke of signs before Sophia's return, they were not predicting disasters or celestial alignments. They described inner conditions. Moments when humanity reaches the limit of imbalance and something begins to correct itself. If this sounds abstract, look at your own experience. How many structures around you feel strained? How many narratives feel hollow? How often do you sense that the world is performing stability while something deeper trembles beneath it? When wisdom rises, authority does not fall through violence. It becomes irrelevant. Control depends on fear and confusion, but clarity dissolves both. And clarity is not the same as information. Information overwhelms. Clarity simplifies. It reveals the invisible agreements behind everyday life. You may have comfort if you abandon truth. You may have approval if you silence your intuition. You may feel safe if you remain asleep. Sophia is the impulse inside you that eventually refuses those contracts. This is where the signs become personal. They are not predictions. They are markers that the inner soil is becoming fertile again. The first sign is subtle but unmistakable. The soul becomes allergic to the superficial. Things that once entertained you now feel draining. Not because you have become superior, but because your inner being cannot feed on emptiness anymore. You may still participate in the world, still laugh, still achieve, but something in you resists false living. Many interpret this stage as restlessness. Yet, what if it is not restlessness at all? What if it is discernment awakening? The second sign deepens this shift. Meaning becomes more powerful than pleasure. Stimulation loses its charm. The constant chase for distraction begins to feel like a trap. The world encourages perpetual engagement because engagement is profitable. But when Sophia stirs, you begin craving depth, conversations that matter, work that feels aligned, presence that is real. This hunger grows stronger than ambition, stronger than the need to be admired. It is not loud, but it is persistent. Then comes the third sign, and this is where many people become disoriented. Old identities begin to dissolve. Roles you once wore comfortably start to feel tight. Relationships built on performance reveal their fragility. You may feel as though you are losing yourself. Yet in the Gnostic rhythm, restoration begins as dismantling. It feels like collapse because the structure you built around your true self is cracking. But perhaps it is not destruction. Perhaps it is correction. And if you have felt that cracking lately, many are standing at that same threshold. What matters now is how you choose to see it. The question is not whether it is happening. The question is whether you will interpret it as crisis or doorway. Because when the structure begins to crack, most people rush to repair the old walls. They try to restore the familiar version of themselves. They ask, how do I feel normal again? How do I get back to who I was? But in the Gnostic vision, that cracking is not failure. It is initiation. It is the moment when the architecture of illusion weakens enough for light to enter. If Sophia's return is real as an inner process, then there must be a mechanism, a way wisdom moves, a way it crosses the threshold from myth into lived experience. The early teachings attributed to Jesus did not focus only on commandments or moral codes. They pointed to perception. They used parables and symbols to train attention, not what to believe, but what to notice. How to recognize the subtle shift when the inner world begins reorganizing itself. Sophia does not force her way into a distracted mind. Wisdom cannot settle in a heart addicted to noise. It cannot remain in someone who is constantly performing for approval. According to the inner tradition, she returns when the conditions are ready, when the soil has been softened by questioning, when the soul has grown tired of pretending, when the hunger for truth outweighs the comfort of illusion. Here is the paradox. When wisdom arrives, it rarely feels like blessing at first. It feels like disruption, chaos, exposure. Because wisdom does not preserve what is false. It illuminates it. And illumination burns. Many imagine the divine feminine as softness alone, as flow and gentleness. Yet Sophia is also piercing intelligence. She is the voice that quietly says, "This is not real. This is not aligned. This is not who you are." That voice does not shout. It does not condemn. It simply refuses to participate in distortion. This brings us to the deeper signs. The first was the soul's allergy to superficiality. The second was the hunger for meaning. The third was the collapse of old identities. The fourth sign, the one that marks the point of no return, is more subtle. It is when you stop fearing the loss of the false life, when you no longer bargain with illusion, when you no longer ask, "How can I awaken but keep everything the same?" Something steadier begins to guide you. You sense that even if certain structures fall, something truer will remain. This is the moment the prison loosens its grip, not because the walls disappear overnight, but because your allegiance shifts. You would rather be aligned than comfortable, rather be real than approved. This is not rebellion for its own sake, it is coherence. And when coherence stabilizes inside you, reality responds differently. Synchronicities increase, conversations shift. Opportunities that match your deeper values appear, not as magic tricks, but as reflections of a reorganized inner field. The Gnostics describe this union as wisdom and light moving together. Christ and Sophia, not competing forces, but complementary currents. Wisdom reveals the pattern, light reveals the next honest step. When you are anxious or confused, instead of asking, "What should I do?" you might ask, "What am I not seeing clearly?" And then, what is the most truthful step available now? These are not religious rituals. They are inner alignments, small acts of participation in your own awakening. And perhaps the most radical realization is this: systems of control do not collapse because they are attacked. They weaken when people withdraw their unconscious participation. A world built on confusion survives on borrowed attention, and the moment your attention becomes conscious, the contract quietly breaks. You no longer donate energy to what feels false. You no longer sustain narratives that contradict your inner knowing. This is how distortion fades, not through force, through non-participation. Sophia's return, then, is a threshold quiet, inward, and unmistakable once you cross it, a pattern written into consciousness itself. First, the intolerance for emptiness. Then, the hunger for depth. Then, the dismantling of masks. Finally, the release of fear around losing what was never truly you. If you recognize yourself in this progression, it does not mean you have arrived somewhere special. It may simply mean the ember within you is being uncovered. There is a quiet urgency in this moment of history, not the urgency of panic, but of opportunity, a chance to examine the invisible agreements guiding your life, to notice where you trade truth for comfort, to sense where you are still performing, and to gently withdraw from what diminishes you. You do not need to destroy your world. You need only to stop feeding what is hollow. If enough individuals cross that inner threshold, the collective atmosphere changes. A culture built on distraction begins to feel unbearable. A system rooted in fear loses its persuasive power, not because it is overthrown, but because it is outgrown. This is the inversion hidden inside the myth. The world does not end in catastrophe. It transforms through consciousness. So, if something inside you feels both unsettled and strangely clear, don't rush to silence it. Just stay with it for a moment. Let the discomfort reveal what it is burning away. What you are experiencing may not be collapse at all. It may be the slow return of a wisdom that was never truly gone, only waiting for you to be ready to hold it again. So perhaps nothing here was random. Not the restlessness you have felt, not the quiet dissatisfaction, not the subtle cracking of old identities, and not the strange clarity rising beneath the noise of the world. If these themes echoed inside you, it does not mean you are falling behind or losing your way. It may simply mean you are sensitive to a deeper rhythm moving through this time. There is no need to force conclusions or rush toward certainty. What awakens does so in its own season. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not alone in this inner turning. The movement we have explored is not loud, and it does not demand performance. It unfolds quietly, like light gradually filling a room at dawn. If something within you recognizes these signs, let that recognition be enough for now. There is nothing you must prove, nothing you must defend. The path of inner knowing has always been subtle, always personal, always intimate. And whatever is shifting within you is not a mistake. It belongs to your current season, to the exact terrain your soul is walking through. If wisdom is returning, it does not do so with pressure, but with presence. It does not push. It waits to be noticed. So let yourself rest here for a moment, without striving, without trying to solve anything. Trust that what has begun will continue to unfold in the right measure. And if you feel called to keep exploring these hidden layers of perception and remembrance, there are deeper reflections waiting just ahead. As I reflect on everything we've just explored, what stays with me most is not the mythology, not the ancient texts, not even the symbolism, but the quiet recognition that something within us has always known. To me, this story feels less like information and more like remembrance, like brushing dust off a mirror that was never broken, only covered. It feels as though these teachings are not asking us to believe anything new, but to notice what has been stirring inside us all along. And I can't help but wonder what this stirred in you. Did something resonate softly? Did a certain part feel uncomfortably accurate? Or maybe there was a moment where you felt seen in a way you didn't expect. I would genuinely love to hear how this landed for you. If one idea, one sign, or even one sentence stayed with you, share it below. Sometimes writing a single line like, "I feel the shift," or "I'm in the middle of that cracking," can open a deeper layer of understanding, not just for you, but for others reading alongside you. If this exploration felt meaningful, you can support this space simply by letting it be known, by leaving a like, or choosing to stay connected for future reflections. There is something powerful about gathering around these conversations, about realizing that awakening is not a solitary path. And maybe the most important part is this: whatever you are experiencing right now, it matters. Your process matters, your questions matter, and your voice, shared openly, might be exactly what someone else needed to read today.